The Wyoming night of 1879 groaned like a wounded beast. The wind whipped across Eden's Hollow, carrying the smell of sodden rain and acrid smoke. The Maddox stable was red with fire, its wooden roof cracking like bone. The townspeople milled about outside the fence, someone shouting, "Watch out!" A thin cry pierced the rain. Alina Hartfield stopped. Josie's cry, a 3-year-old girl. "Oh God, why was she in there?" "Stop!" Cole Maddox shouted, rushing forward and grabbing Elena's arm. His shoulder was soaked, his eyes burning with panic. "I'm in. You're here." A black-coated figure swept past like a shadow, the barrel of a gun flashing. Bang! The bullet whizzed past, tearing the edge of Cole's shoulder. He staggered, his teeth grinding. The crowd roared. Someone shouted, "Sheriff! Sheriff!" Elena didn't wait another breath. She tore off her skirt, threw it into the rain gutter, wrung it out, and wrapped it around her nose and mouth. Tying her hair up, she dashed toward the barn door, where the flames were swooping like hungry wolves. The flames hit her face, hot, stinging her eyes. The smoke was like a black hand covering her lungs. "Josie!" Elena screamed hoarsely. The cry answered, broken, coughing. She squeezed into the passage between the stalls. The roof groaned. A lever squealed. The black horse Sable stamped her feet, her eyes white, foaming at the mouth. The iron door was jammed with heat. Elena reached out, hot, to pull the latch, kicked hard and it snapped. "Come on, pretty," she whispered, patting her scorched nostrils. Sable neighed, galloping like an arrow, fanning the wind and scattering the flames. Behind the burning straw, she saw Josie's rag doll, her rag arms speckled with char. "Josie!" Helena fell to her knees. From the last crack in the cage, wet eyes looked at her. The girl coughed, clutching her chest. There was no straight path. Between them was a burning board, its flames flickering like a snake's tongue. Overhead, the wooden roof shook. Elena's eyes darted. Mezzanine ladder, Reen's wet blanket. She pulled the wet blanket over her head, crawling low, hand to hand, the fire crackling like corn kernels. The smell of burning hair lingered in her eyelids. "Close your eyes, Josie. Blow like a birthday candle." She picked up the doll and threw it at her. "Hold it, baby." Hands free, she knocked the burning board with her knee, pushing it to the edge. Flames splattered, but she managed to get a crack open. Elena held Josie close as if she were holding her own heart. She pulled the blanket over her, crouched low, crawling backward, her hands groping for solid ground. A block of wood cracked high above her, crashing down with a crash right behind her, heat shooting up and scorching her shoulder. "Just a few more steps, baby," she gasped, her lungs burning. Outside, Cole roared through the storm. "Elena! Josie!" The barn door swung open with a thunderous kick. Cole lunged forward, his arm as solid as a wooden pole. Elena pressed herself and the child into his arms. Cole held Josie, his back to block the fire, his other arm reaching behind her, pulling Elena. They dashed out into the rain, falling flat on the sodden ground. Fire roared like a cannon behind them, rain pouring down on numb skin. "Shh!" Elena gasped. "Breathe, slow," Cole said hoarsely, pressing his ear to Josie's chest. "She's okay. She can breathe." He looked up. Elena's breath was hot on his neck, the smell of smoke and sweat mixed with the smell of rain. The distance between them was only a missed heartbeat. On her collarbone, the raindrops slid like silver. His rough hand unconsciously touched, checking the burn, then paused a beat longer than necessary. The gunshot tore through the sky again. The bullet hit the fence post. Cole pulled Elena close to his chest, their silhouettes pressed together in the rain-soaked porch. "Stay put." He looked over his shoulder. Across the street, Silas Braden stood leaning on his umbrella, his mouth twisted into a filthy smile. "She brought fire to your house, Maddox," he bellowed, "and you'll see that women like that burn everything they touch." Elena paused for a second, then stood up, hugging Josie tightly. "I took her out of the fire, Silas," she said, her voice coldly calm. "And the fire, you brought it." The crowd murmured. Someone looked down. Someone looked toward the muddy road, where the sheriff's lights swayed toward them. Cole pressed his forehead against Elena's, his voice low enough for only the two of them to hear. "Are you burned anywhere else?" "Just a little sore," she whispered. The warmth of her answer rippled through the storm. For a cruelly brief moment, all the noise faded. Only the sound of labored breathing, the sound of a missed heartbeat, and the smell of rain on human skin. Elena grabbed Cole's cuff, felt the muscle tighten beneath her skin. Tense, protective, and something that had just flared between life and death. "The sheriff is here," someone cried. The stable collapsed, sending a final column of fire that collapsed like a confession. Silas took a half step back, his smile tinged with rain. Cole handed Josie to Elena, his other hand clasping hers. Not to pull, but to promise. Amid the smell of smoke, rain, and ash, Elena Hartfield straightened. She turned to shield the baby from the wind, looking through the curtain of water into Cole's gray eyes. No words needed to be said, but the message was there. They would run no more. And tonight's storm was only the beginning. A week before the fire, the Wyoming sky had been a wet wool blanket over Eden's Hollow. The rain fell steadily, thin and sharp, whipping up muddy streaks on the dirt road leading out of town. Elena Hartfield walked alone, her canvas crossbody bag frayed at the edges, a thin, rain-stained scarf wrapped around her neck. Behind her were closed doors. Mrs. Kellen's bakery, where she'd given crumbs as a babysitter, now shuttered as if afraid of wind and rain and rumors. In front of her was a gray field, whispering like the town's whisper. Madame Lily's house. The words clung to you, like the smell of smoke in your hair. Though in truth, Elena was just cleaning, heating milk, putting children to bed. The grown-ups liked to tell stories in a way that made them feel moral. She paused under the porch of the old church, the kind that was abandoned because the congregation had built a shiny new one right in town. As Elena crouched down, clutching her duffel bag, the door creaked open. A woman with red cheeks poked her head out, her eyes as sharp as needles. "Go away, girl. This porch is no shelter for the people from that house." Elena tried to laugh softly. "I just need to sit here for 10 minutes to calm my nerves." 10 minutes became a night, then a lifetime. "Go away." The door slammed shut. Elena said nothing more. She had run out of words in the previous town, explaining to each person that her hands only knew how to hold needles and soup spoons, not how to pick up coins or pull curtains. The wind howled, followed by the strangely regular sound of horse hooves in the rain. A man on horseback emerged from the water. His dark oil coat flowed down the horse's body like a stream, his wide-brimmed hat pulled low. He pulled the reins, letting the horse pant, the heat rising up in a cloud of cold. He looked at Elena for a few silent beats, the look of someone who had seen more winters than his age should have. No curiosity, no pity, just calculating what to do now. "Do you have a name?" he asked. His voice was low and even, like old wood. "Elena." "Where did you come from?" "There's nowhere to go," Elena said, looking at her cracked boots. "Who's waiting for you here?" "No." The answer fell like a pebble in a puddle, rippled and disappeared. He nodded slightly, pushed his hat up a little. Elena saw a thin scar on his left jaw, not making the man ugly but making his face less flat. "I'm Cole Maddox," he said. "The farm is 5 miles away. I have 2 girls. Ruth is 6, Josie is almost 3. Elena didn't understand why he was telling her this until he said it bluntly, without beating around the bush. "I need a mother for them. You need a home." Elena looked up. The proposals she had heard were all pale, flowery, or rather, the insincere ones she had overheard in Madame Lily's kitchens. The smell of alcohol, the smell of tobacco, the sweet promises that dissipated like smoke. This one, straight as a newly braided rope, not fragrant, not shiny, just strong. "I'm not looking for someone to love," Cole said, as if reading the hesitation in her eyes. "I don't have time for courtship. I'm looking for someone who is kind, can cook, is handy, and won't scare the kids. In return, you'll get a roof over your head, a warm bed, dinner. It'll be a lot of work, but fair." A shiver ran through Elena's shoulders, not from the cold. She looked at her hands. Her index finger had a seamstress's callus. Her wrist had a dark stain from washing powder. She thought of Ruth, Josie, names that sounded like little slippers on the wooden floor. She thought of the warm room, the oil lamp, the steaming bowl of soup. And she thought of the eyes in the town, the needle-like gaze. Needle that could sew clothes, but could also tear skin. "I have 3 conditions," Elena said, her voice low but clear. No alcohol, no violence, no lies. Cole nodded quickly without needing to consider. I'll add one, he said. No questions about each other's past until the other person is ready to tell. Elena smiled briefly. A real smile, rare in the long weeks. That makes four. That makes four, Cole repeated, his expression softening a little. He took the wool blanket from his saddlebag and handed it to her. Wrap it up. It's easy to get sick from this cold. Elena took the blanket. The smell of damp wool mixed with horse sweat and pine resin, a good smell like a promise without pretentiousness. I can sew, mend, start a fire, babysit, feed horses, she said, as if afraid if she stayed silent too long the offer would fade. I've learned to make bean soup quite well. Enough to live on, Cole replied. He lowered himself and held out his hand. Get on. I'll take you home. It's muddy and you'll fall if you walk. His hand was large and warm, not holding any tighter than necessary, but enough so that Elena felt like she wouldn't slip away from anything important. She placed her hand in his, the toe of her shoe finding the edge of the stirrup. Thank you, she whispered. We can try, Cole replied. No promises except fairness. The rest, time will tell. The horse reared, mud splattered on the hem of its skirts. As they rolled off the old church porch, the sound of the rain became less sharp, more steady like breathing. Elena clutched her cloth bag to her chest. Inside was a needle, a spool of pale blue thread, and an unfinished rag doll. It occurred to her that perhaps her life was like that doll, incomplete, in limbo, judged by the world when it was still unfinished. But with enough good thread and patient hands, it could still be made. And tonight, perhaps she had just found a chance to sew it back together. The first days at the Maddox farm were not as peaceful as the smoke. In the morning, Elena lit the fire and cooked corn porridge. Ruth stood in the doorway, hugging her doll, her strangely old eyes watching her every move, as if trying to gauge whether this new woman would upset the rhythm of the house. Josie hid behind the table leg, fingers in her mouth, the tip of her nose pink with cold. Elena spoke slowly, put her bowl on the table, then took a step back, giving her children room to walk. No one did. In town, rumors traveled faster than horses. The grocery store sold salt and beans, but when it came to yarn and soap, the girl at the counter shook her head. Out of stock. When Cole went in with Elena, out of stock suddenly became in stock. On the way home, he led his horse on foot, the silence stretching as long as the mud road. You don't need to explain, Elena said, looking at the broken fence. I know how to wait. Cole nodded, but her gaze was briefly wistful, a nameless fear. What if she left like everyone else? That evening, Elena cleaned Anna's old room. The faint scent of lavender lingered in the chest. A half-embroidered handkerchief, 2 hesitant violets, lay at the bottom of the trunk. Elena's heart sank. This was a house of unsown pain. She folded the handkerchief, put it in its proper place, as if touching the invisible boundary between past and present. Ruth quietly pulled a chair closer to the kitchen, set the doll on the table. Do you know how to sew? She asked solemnly. Elena smiled, handed Ruth the needle and thread. Try threading it. The needle wobbled, the thread tangled. Ruth looked at Elena, not to ask for help, but to check if the adults were losing patience. Elena patiently untangled it, rethreaded it, and returned the needle to her little hands. In the doorway, Cole stood still, his shoulders relaxed. The house did not laugh, but his breathing was more even. And in that silence, a seed of hope began to grow. Nights at the farm smelled of pine and damp coats. After a day of cleaning the barn, Cole had a scratch along the back of his hand. Elena boiled water, placed a linen towel over the bowl, and waited for the steam to turn into a thin mist. Give me your hand. Her voice was so soft that the fire died down. Cole held out his hand, his tanned knuckles exposed by the lamplight. When Elena bent down, a few strands of hair fell across his cheek. Cole meant to say, "Let me do it," but the smell of andalwood soap mixed with turpentine made the words recede. She wiped slowly. The touch of warm water on his skin made him pause, then relax. Does it hurt? Less than before. That's good. Her answer was calm, like someone used to soothing a crying baby. The bandage was wrapped around his wrist, her head tilted so close that Cole could see her breath reflected in the hollow of Elena's shoulder, heaving, then uncoiling. She tied the knot, her fingertips brushing the pulse in his wrist, a silent electric spark. Early morning, the well was covered in mist. Elena turned her back, holding out the apron. "Help me." Cole stepped forward. The distance was measured by an adult's heartbeat. He slipped the cloth around his waist, tying it just tight enough. When he withdrew his hand, the back of his hand lightly touched the back of his thin shirt, a light touch that they both felt. Elena didn't turn around, just smiled faintly. "Thank you." "But," a word shorter than a breath. At night, Ruth dozed off by the stove. Josie snored softly with a stuffed rabbit. Elena pulled the wool blanket back and sat down next to Cole. Outside, the wind swept through the roof. Inside, it was as quiet as a lake. "Thank you for the garden," she said, her eyes fixed on the fire. "Wherever your hand is, there is a garden," Cole blurted, then looked a little confused. Elena tilted her head, her eyes meeting his. No words were added, just shoulder to shoulder. They sat like that for a long time, long enough to realize that their heartbeats had learned to keep pace. Rumors don't need legs, they grow wings. After the warm evenings by the fire, Elena noticed the town doors closing like sleepy, malicious eyelids. On Monday morning, she led Ruth and Josie to the schoolyard. The teacher stood on the steps, clutching the report card. Her smile was as polite as a starched tablecloth. "Ruth should stay home today," she said, her voice low but audible. "There are some parents who are troubled by the Maddox family situation." Ruth squeezed Elena's hand, her young face suddenly wrinkled like an adult's. Elena nodded. "I understand." But on the way back, she heard a mother whisper to the person next to her. "That Madame Lily's there, I told you." At the grocery store, the counter girl changed her name from Elena to Miss Hartfield for 2 days. The farm's credit book was still there, but every time Elena came in, the girl asked, "Cash or book?" The accent on the word cash was like a trap. That afternoon, as Elena left the store, the girl stuck her head out the window and said loudly, "Watch out for a spool of pale blue thread." Elena looked back, her heart pounding in her ribs. She held out the cloth bag. There was no spool of thread. "I must be mistaken," the girl shrugged, but the necks around her had already raised their eyes like pins peeled from a pincushion. That evening, Sheriff Dobson stopped by, his horse still sweaty. He took off his hat, scratched his ear, looked at Elena, then at Cole. "We've had some complaints," he said, "about the moral safety of the children." Cole stood up, his eyes dark. "Who complained?" "People were talking in generalities, besides." Sheriff took a piece of paper from his coat. Anna's parents sent a letter asking for a review of the custody of Ruth and Josie. They said they would get a lawyer. Ruth stood in the doorway, dead silent. Elena felt the house suddenly as cramped as a barn on a rainy day, the air thick and suffocating. Sheriff sighed softly. "I don't want to interfere, but if the town calls for a meeting, I have to stand up." When Sheriff left, the wind blew through the window, making the oil lamp sway. Elena put her hands on the table to keep calm. "If you go," she said slowly, "everything can be quiet." Cole shook his head immediately, decisively, as if cutting a hemp rope in half. "If you go, we lose ourselves. You didn't teach your daughter that to be accepted, you have to suffer injustice." Elena looked at him. In Cole's eyes, there was no fiery hero, only the perseverance of a man who knew the price of standing still. The next day, Silas Braden came to his bar earlier than usual. He ordered a drink, then stood at the window looking out at the street as if watching the rain. Each person he passed threw a different story at them, but they all ended in the same vein. "She used to live at Madame Lily's. You want your son sitting at the table with her?" By noon, the conversation had gone from heard to sure. In the afternoon, Mrs. Kellen, nice as ever, brought Elena a loaf of bread. "Don't go into town for a few days," she mumbled. "Let the people settle down." Elena thanked him, but knew that telling a storm to settle down by closing her door would only make the wind stronger. That night, Elena sorted through Anna's wardrobe. She found a silver ribbon, slightly frayed at the edges, and a half-embroidered handkerchief. She sat for a long time, thinking about the woman she had never known, but who was present in every corner. "I don't want to replace anyone," Elena said, her voice loud enough for the fire to hear. Cole was across the table, silent. "Nor did I ask you to," he replied. "I just want the children to have someone to love, and to be loved in return." The next morning, Elena took Sable out to the fields. The sunlight was thin as glass. She smelled something strange, the scent of kerosene on the stable floor, very faint, like a whisper not to be detected. She bent down, touched the wood. Wet. Elena swallowed. "Cole," she called. He ran over, frowning. They looked at each other, no words needed. Someone had just passed by with bad intentions. At noon, a note was pinned to the fence. "Leave Maddox's house, you filth, or fire will cleanse." The writing was scrawled, the ink smeared by dew. Cole crumpled the paper, his eyes darkening. "I'll sleep in the barn tonight," he said. "No," Elena shook her head. "I'll stay in the house with the kids. You'll take turns with me. No one in this house is alone." The words were out before she could be afraid. Cole looked at her for a long time, then nodded. In the afternoon, Sheriff came again, looking tired. "They want a meeting in the square tonight," he announced. "To hear you speak." "You will speak," Cole replied. "And I will speak too," Elena added, her voice soft but firm. Sheriff paused. "You should stay home." "I've been home too many years," Elena smiled, as if she had just finished sewing a difficult stitch. Dusk fell, lengthening the shadows on the fence. Ruth took the doll, mended its hand, and handed it to Elena. "Mom, I did it." From you to Mom was a small bridge, but it spanned a deep chasm. Elena's heart clenched, warm and painful. She held the child, her fingertips trembling slightly. The night fell. The wind changed direction, carrying a distant burning smell. Elena put her finger to her lips, signaling silence. Outside, Sable let out a short, uneasy sigh. In the direction of the town, footsteps and whispers like weeds scraping against each other. Tragedy did not knock. It drifted straight into the house through the cracks in the wind. And before the night was over, the fire would learn to call every person in this house by name. Eden's Hollow Square was crowded that night. Lanterns were hanging here and there. The rain had stopped, but the wind was still cold. Sheriff Dobson stood on the steps of the town hall, his hand raised. "Whoever has something to say, speak, no shouting, no touching." The noise died down to a whisper. Cole stepped forward. His coat was old, his hat pulled low, his voice low but clear. "I don't know Elena's past enough to tell you. I only know the present. Before she came, there was no singing in my house. The youngest only ate if I held her, the oldest cried every night. Since she came," he paused, "my children have been sleeping. They laugh, they say mama. I don't need anything else to believe." He turned around, his eyes taking in every face. "If you want to judge anyone, judge me," I invited her back. A woman in the congregation jumped up. "And the morals of the children?" Cole replied immediately. "Morality is how adults treat the weak in broad daylight." The crowd shuddered slightly. The sheriff coughed, inviting the next person. Elena stepped forward, empty-handed, eyes straight. "I'm not asking for mercy. I came here to work and love the children that man trusted me with. I told him 4 things. No alcohol, no violence, no lies, and no asking about the past if the other person wasn't ready. I keep my word." She tilted her head slightly toward Ruth and Josie, sitting on the steps. "I'm not perfect, but I'm kind to them every day." A dry laugh rang out. Silas Braden leaned his shoulder against the lamppost, his smile wan. "Madam Lily's kind? Let me tell you something. She used to work there. The kind who cleans the kitchen with their left hand and makes their beds with their right." A few oohs and ahs echoed. Elena didn't blush. She just looked straight at Silas. "Do you have proof?" He shrugged. "The whole town is proof." "And this?" Cole held up a piece of ink-smeared paper he'd picked up from the fence. "Who's writing?" Silas waved his hand. "Waste paper." From the crowd, little Owen, who used to shoe horses for farms, shyly stood up. "Last night I saw Mr. Silas standing near Uncle Cole's fence, holding a can of oil. He said, 'Everything you see is rain.'" The crowd stirred. Silas snapped, "You brat." Sheriff raised his eyebrows. "I'll ask you again." The air was thick. Mrs. Kellen cleared her throat. All I know is that Miss Elena sewed for my child for free." The salesgirl, who had once changed Miss Elena to Miss Hartfield, startled and looked down. Silas looked around, saw the balance of public opinion tilting, and changed his tone. "I'm just worried about the kids, a woman with a dirty past." A scream from the dirt road cut across. "Smoke! Smoke from the Maddox farm!" Faces turned in the same direction like birds flapping their wings. Cole didn't say another word, leaping off the steps and dashing away. Elena pulled up her skirts, picked Josie up by the waist, and called for Ruth to follow. Sheriff shouted, "Shove! Rope! Go!" The hill opened up, and a column of black smoke like a spear pierced the night sky. The Maddox stable was on fire. Horses whinnied, wood crackled. Cole dropped the bucket and ran straight for the gate. "Ruth, stay with Sheriff." He turned to look for Josie, but she slipped out of Elena's arms when she saw the stuffed rabbit lying close to the stable. "Josie!" Elena screamed, her heart sinking into her feet. The stable gate flashed. Someone, quick as a shadow, threw something inside, and the flames soared. "Stop!" Cole rushed forward. The shadow spun, fired. The bullet grazed Cole's shoulder, his shirt ripped. Elena screamed, then without waiting for anyone, grabbed the hem of her dress, dipped it in the water trough, wrapped it around her face, and ran in, crouching. Smoke rushed in like a wall. "Josie?" she called. A small, broken cry answered from the end of the row. The iron door of Sable's stall was jammed with heat. Elena held the latch, kicked hard. The metal snapped. The black horse bolted, the wind from its galloping fanning the flames, creating a thin corridor. Elena crawled over, tossed the doll to Josie. "Hold on, baby." Then she grabbed the child, covered herself with a wet blanket, and crawled back inch by inch, while a beam crashed behind her, sparks stinging her wrists. The main door swung open from Cole's charge. He leaned halfway in, pulled both mother and child out, and turned to block the fire. His face was pale from the pain in his shoulder, but his hands were like wooden poles. They tumbled to the wet ground. Elena pressed her ear to Josie's chest. There was a breath, thin but steady. She looked up, met Cole's eyes. In his, panic turned to something else. Absolute. A shout, "Put the gun down, Silas." Sheriff and the men rushed forward. Silas took a half step back, his hand still at the ready. The smell of kerosene wafted from his sleeve, so strong it made the person closest to him wince. Sheriff snatched his gun, threw him down, and handcuffed him. A wet match fell from Silas's pocket. By the fence, Owen picked up the dented can. "It's his," he said, pointing to the faded lettering on the can. The crowd fell silent. The fire roared and collapsed like a confession. Sheriff looked around. "No one here is a judge, but tonight we know who burned the barn." He turned to Cole and Elena. "I'll take the report. Now, keep the children warm." Cole draped his jacket over Elena's shoulders. She was shivering, but not from cold. He pressed his forehead to hers, his voice hoarse from the smoke. "Are you okay?" "I'm breathing," she said, her hand on the gash in his shoulder. "And you?" "I'll be okay." Through the smell of rain and smoke and ash, they held hands, not to pull each other up, but to promise that from this moment on, nothing would push them off the same path. In the doorway, Ruth held Josie, wide-eyed but less afraid. Because in the storm, their two grown-ups had chosen to stand together, and that was the beginning of all the fairest judgments in life. After the fire, the sky seemed washed clean. The first morning, Mrs. Kellen brought a warm loaf of bread, left it on the doorstep, and left immediately. The girl at the grocery store wrapped a spool of pale blue yarn and put it in Ruth's basket, murmuring, "Sorry." Teachers outside the school sent Ruth a note to return to class. Sheriff Dobson filed a case. The oil can and the match became evidence. Silas was detained pending trial. The town had not changed, but it was less bowing to what was right. That afternoon, Cole placed a small wooden box on the kitchen table. He was as awkward as someone tying a tie for the first time. "We should make it clear," he said, "for the children and for what we have chosen." Elena looked at the box, a simple ring, the metal gleaming modestly like the light of an oil lamp. She nodded, not because she was afraid of gossip, but because her heart had chosen long ago. They were married right there in the garden, the land Elena had reseeded after the wind-scratched season. Sheriff was witness. Mrs. Kellen stood by. Ruth held the ring. Josie held the stuffed rabbit. The vows were short. No alcohol, no violence, no lies. I will tell the truth every day, even when silence is easier. Alina added, I will teach my children the seasons, the letters, and teach them to be grateful for what they have. Cole chuckled, and teach them to forgive, starting with themselves. Before the sun set, Alina folded Anna's unfinished handkerchief, 2 unfinished violets, and buried it under the violets. She whispered, I will sew the rest with peace. Cole put his arm around her shoulders. There was no lively song, just the sound of the wind through the wooden roof, the sound of 2 children running barefoot through the rows of young cabbages. At night, they sat by the stove. Elena told Ruth and Josie stories. Cole mended the squeaky window. Each little thing was like a stitch, stitching the house together. They did not need the town to bless them. Each morning they woke up, choosing each other anew. And warmth from that was full, without words. Some loves begin not with a fire but with a porch and 4 simple things. No alcohol, no violence, no lies, and respect for each other's past. It is these little rules that become a family charter, saving 2 children, a man of few words, and a woman who is blackened by rumors. Eden's Hollow reminds us that prejudice is cheap and kindness is expensive. People are more likely to believe gossip than the honest whispers in the kitchen late at night. But every day, Elena lights a fire, mends torn sleeves, teaches her children to spell, cleans the garden. The seemingly trivial things are the stitches that stitch the torn world. Their love does not shout, but endures. The fire in the stable shows that prayer is not a substitute for courage to act. Sometimes you have to rush into the smoke to carry a child out. You have to stand in the middle of the square to say the difficult words. You have to look the accuser in the eye and say, I am not perfect, but I am kind. When adults choose right over easy, children learn courage. Anna's letter, buried under the violets, is another lesson. Forgiveness does not deny pain, but lays it to the ground to bloom. We do not replace anyone. We only continue with peace. In the end, home is not a wooden wall or a tiled roof, but a place where we choose each other again each morning. A nod at the kitchen door, a tied apron, a story to put a child to sleep. These are the real vows. The short message, choose kind, despite the noise around you. Choose easy. Love is sewing small stitches, 1 stitch a day. Family is a decision to repeat, not a miracle that happens once.